2021 has been a year for the women, if you understand what I'm saying. First, it was Kamala Harris, the first female and first black vice president of the biggest democracy in the world, United States of America. And then, secondly, their very own Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala suddenly emerged as the Director General of World Trade Organization, first woman and first black. Isn't that wonderful? In a year that women are being celebrated at a time like this. And so joining me on the special interview today to make better sense of all of these and apply it to the challenges and the life of women all over the world is someone I would describe as a woman's right advocate. She prefers to see herself as a businesswoman, but she has a strong view, and that is important for you to come across now. Tracy-Alero Doyle, thanks for joining us on the interview.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with looking at the theme for this year's International Women's Day, which is Choose to Challenge. What's your thought?
I think it is a concept whose time has come. The reality is that women have always chosen to challenge. We've chosen to challenge the ways in which we're brought up. We've chosen to challenge childbirth. We've chosen to challenge society's constrictions on us. We've always chosen to challenge. I think that history has done us a disservice in representing us in ways that make us seem unambitious, hysterical, and lacking in ambition. But we've always challenged. So I like the idea that 2021, we're focusing on that. We know what we want. We know what we deserve. We intend to take the village along with us. And so I think it's a very apt.
Okay. Before we get into your strategy of taking the village along with you, let's look at your thoughts about women in business and corporations. Some 20 years ago, it's a bit of a struggle for women to rise to the top. But down the line, what's your assessment? Has the narration or has the story changed?
As someone who's been working for almost 25 years now in professional services, I started off in technology in Los Angeles. I moved into financial services in London. I continued that in Hong Kong, and now I work in Nigeria. So I've not only worked across a number of geographies, I've also worked across a number of different types of industries. And I will say consistently, although progress has been made, i.e. you do have more women at higher stages of representation in businesses, what you tend to see is that these women are the exception to the rule. They are not repeatable necessarily occurrences. And that is part of the issue with the way women are progressing in industries. We also tend to progress in certain industries better than others. So if you look at senior leadership management in most of the top companies in this world, where you see women, and this is not a disservice to those women, but they typically will occupy the types of roles that some people perceive as supportive services. So you may see more women in human resources, you may see more women in marketing. How many women do you see running a profit and loss statement? How many women do you see running sales divisions? How many women are the rainmakers in these organizations? So yes, we are making progress, and no progress should be derided in any shape, form, or way. But I will say, having lived in Los Angeles, like I said, in London, and now in Nigeria with Platform Capital as a chief strategy officer, yes, we are making progress. We are here. We can be rewarded, we can be treated on our own merits, but it also needs to feed into a pipeline. So there isn't one Tracy-Alero Doyle. So there isn't one Kamala Harris. So there isn't one Ellen Sirleaf. And that's where I think the work needs to be done, to create processes in place that make these events normal as opposed to exceptional.
I think that it's important also to find or identify what the limitation had been. Because from your comment, women function more, maybe not necessarily better, but function more in certain areas, human resources, marketing, and so on. What has the limitation been? Has there been any glass ceiling? Has there been anyone holding down women or restricting them from functioning in certain other areas?
Well, frankly speaking, I think it's a matter of interest and company culture, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with being in human resources or marketing. But having worked for a very large organization, HSBC, for almost 9 years, I will tell you that if you are aspiring to senior leadership, if you plan to be a CEO, a COO, a C-suite level person that is running a significant profit and loss statement, yes, it is great to have experience in some of what are considered support functions, but if you are not seen as someone who is responsible for profit, for revenue, for bringing in customers, for selling products, it will restrict, I believe, your ability to progress.
Is there a cultural, I want to understand, is it that men are limiting or restricting women in this case, or that women had accepted that this is where we belong?
I think we should avoid simple answers. And the reality is it's probably a combination of both. Truth be told, a lot of women have interests in those areas, and those are valid interests. But also, are organizations more comfortable with having women in support capacity than they are in a leadership capacity? And I think the only area where you find a difference is when you enter the tech world. So anything that has to do with STEM, science, technology, mathematics, that's where you see very different outcomes for women. And that I believe, and having started off as a programmer, I know this to be true. Because the benchmarks for performance are absolute in the technology industries, as a woman, you are judged based on the work that you do. It is your output that counts. Either you can program or you can't. Either you know mathematics or you don't. Either you can engineer or you don't. That makes, in many ways, for a much more level playing field because it's almost entirely looking at ability. The other types of industries that will merge soft skills with hard skills, and who has access to the CEO, and who plays golf on the weekends, and who can stay in the office until 11 o'clock at night, those are a little bit more difficult to navigate, not impossible. So I think women tend to shine, and you'll see that women in tech in Nigeria is a huge space. There's a dynamic community of women in technology in Nigeria that is just absolutely mind-blowing. And they're not doing it by themselves. They're supported by men, they're supported by the broader society. But I think that certain disciplines lend themselves to very absolute capability assessments of women, and we tend to thrive in those environments.
Okay, maybe as the conversation goes on, we may find answers to why women cannot play golf over the weekend or stay in the office till late.
I'm happy to talk about that,
maybe
but not from a cannot perspective.
Maybe as we progress. All right, the 1995 Beijing Convention set aside 30% affirmative action for women. And 25 years down the line, countries like Nigeria are still hovering around 10%. What's your assessment of the real issue behind this?
Like any complex ask, the answers are going to be quite convoluted. The attainment of women as a whole is very closely linked to the attainment of the society as a whole, right? We are the mothers, we are the caregivers, we are the market women, we are the cooks, we are the CEOs, we're all of those things. So we are a microcosm of the society itself. So if we say that the attainment of women in Nigeria is hovering around 10% in terms of perhaps leadership roles, it says a lot about where our society is as a whole. Where are we as a society attaining to? And the reality is that women have, to a large degree, been repressed in a society that I think is mostly quite patriarchal, somewhat misogynistic, but quite frankly, everybody has issues. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm not surprised. I will say that having just moved back from Hong Kong after 7 years there, if I benchmark against the attainment of women there, in terms of women in senior leadership, there are a lot more. But having said that, not that much more than you would think. So the issues that we talk about that impact women in Nigeria, education, access, cultural restrictions, religious restrictions, the idea that a woman's place is in the kitchen, as was alluded to by one of our leaders, and those sorts of sentiments, you find them everywhere. So we're not unique. But having said that, we have an obligation to do better. So 10% is an F. I never took a class that I would have passed if I got a 10% in any grade. So we're not doing great. We need to do a lot better.
Okay. Over the years, women had applied this singular strategy of getting what they want, and that is sit back, keep talking about it, and wait until it is given to you. Would you oppose a proposal for a change of strategy, this time being get out there and grab whatever you want? What's your position on this?
Well, first of all, I will challenge the assumption in the question before we move on, which is to say that women have sat back and waited to be given things. I don't necessarily think that is true. I think we do a disservice to our history when we forget the women that came before us that didn't wait, but went ahead and they took. And most women in their everyday lives are not sat at home waiting for anybody to give them anything. They're out there, they're in industry, they're doing things. But I get the point that you're making, which is to say, if you want to move into the upper echelons of leadership, at some point, when do you stop being a supplicant? And when do you become a protagonist in your own story?
And when do you also take the step of, either positioning yourself, if it requires playing golf over the weekend, still borrowing
that's fair enough.
Your phrase, if it requires doing certain things to get to that position where you would be favored for that, that you deserve, don't you think that it's time for more action than rhetorics that may not be heading anywhere?
I think both are required. And a very wise man told me actually a few days ago that you can pursue justice and you can pursue progress. And neither is wrong, but one has to take a backseat to the other. And the reality is that if you do want to progress within the hierarchy and the structures that exist today, those are the rules by which you play. Because nobody is going out of their way to change those rules to benefit you. So back to the golf analogy or the meeting at 11 p.m. The reality is, if that is the mountaintop that you are trying to climb, whether it is in politics or it's in business or it's in any other area, if you want to get to the top in that area, you will do that. And the women that do get to the top in those areas do that. It's a matter of sacrifices that you make. It may not fit with your theology. You may think you shouldn't have to do that to achieve those goals. But the other people are doing it, and they're going to get to where they're going. So from a purely pragmatic perspective, I think you do need to be part of the system to change the system. And being part of the system sometimes means doing things that you may not be comfortable with. The reality of the situation is that I was a senior director at HSBC in Hong Kong, working incredibly unrealistic time zones. I have 2 children, one is 20 and the other is 11. The reality is that as a working mother, there were many days when I was not at home to put them to bed and I was not at home to give them dinner necessarily. I was at work, I was on a conference call, I was traveling. I was doing the things that were required for me to do the job. Now, I could have argued that I shouldn't have had to do those things, but that is a choice that I was willing to make. That is not to say that the pipeline of women behind me, I want them to have to make those same choices. But as a Nigerian, as a pragmatist, as a businesswoman, the reality is you do what you have to do to get to where you want to go. And when you get to that point, you may be in a position to start to change some of those rules, but you do have to get to that point first.
Okay, when we talk about politics, pure politics, people coming out to campaign to be voted for and being there to vote for people, it's a different ball game entirely. It's a different kettle of fish. But one experience that one will always remember is 2011, during the presidential primary of the PDP, a sound woman, one of the finest female politicians we've had in Nigeria, was one of the aspirants, Sarah Jibril. She ran for that post, for that position to be the presidential candidate of the party. Yeah. There were not less than 1,000 women that night that voted. But at the end of the day, Sarah Jibril had only 1 vote, giving birth to this phrase all around now, 1 woman, 1 vote. What is the strategy you would recommend or you would practice or put into effect for women to buy into that dream of self-actualization, for women to begin to support their own, particularly when it comes to contesting for elections and being voted for?
I think firstly, I would like to actually honor Sarah Jibril for what she did, because 2011 was the last time that she ran, but she had run 3 other times in 3 other campaigns. And to have that fortitude, that vision, that determination, she is the very embodiment of choosing to challenge. She's a woman who knew what she wanted to do and despite the feedback, still kept doing it. And that takes incredible resilience. So I would like to honor her. And I would like to treat her legacy as something to aspire to, not something to shy away from. Because you can try something 1,000,000 times and fail. But that's not the point. The point is that you try it. So first of all, I would do that. Second of all, as women, we can be part of our own problem. And that's not to say that we are not all victims of the societies in which we live in, but there's certain narratives that we believe as women. One of those narratives can be that your success is my failure. So in other words, if I elevate you to a position of authority, I am now less than you because you're better than me. That requires looking at life as sort of a zero-sum game, and it isn't. There's more than enough for everyone. So one of the first things, so the campaign launched yesterday by Elect Her. The point there is that it takes allies. It takes all of us to believe that this can happen. There are a significant number of women that, because of a combination of education, life circumstances, cultural norms, fears, and a number of other issues, simply cannot visualize themselves in those positions. And what you fail to see for yourself, you invariably cannot see for somebody else. The reality is that if it is beyond my aspiration or my ability to run for office or to change the world, why should you do it? Why should you get to be the one that gets to shine? Why should you get to be the one that changes the world when the rest of us are here suffering?
But is that a human sentiment or peculiar with women?
No, I think it's a poverty mentality. And I don't mean poverty in terms of money. I think it's poverty in terms of spirituality and aspirations and ambitions. That's the type of poverty I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of short-sightedness that says my success is your failure. The reality is that the people that we first need to make the case for, especially in politics, is not just men, but it's other women. We have to say we hold ourselves accountable. We carry ourselves together. Your success is my success. I'm not getting into office so I can thief all the money and forget all your problems. I'm here because we want life to be better for our sons and our daughters. Women represent all of humanity. Women, you will never meet a woman that just represents other women. We represent the societies that we create. So back to your earlier point, I think that as women, we need to address the issues that hold us back, and it is quite convoluted. We need to talk to ourselves honestly and say, sister, what is it that will make you afraid from voting for another woman? What is the issue here? And then let's talk about them, because if you don't acknowledge them, you can't change them.
Okay, now let's maybe shift away from politics a little bit, in as much as it will keep coming back in some ways. But latest statistics say that 41.1% of Nigerian population live below poverty line, and 70% of these are women. And the definition of being poor here is, earning 137,000 naira per annum. And if you do the math, you will find the seriousness of the situation is even worse than the minimum wage we have in Nigeria. How do you think that this situation will be addressed, having women in mind? They are the ones that are in the rural areas mainly. They are the ones that bear the brunt of poverty, in the real sense of it. How can this be addressed to get more women out of poverty?
I think that the issues that you raise are the issues that affect all of us, but as you've rightly pointed out, they disproportionately impact women. If 7 out of 10 of people living below the poverty line are women, then there's no question that it's more about our issue than others. Coming from a business background and working for an organization like Platform Capital, we don't believe that change comes from the macro. We think it comes from the micro. So it comes from each person trying to do their best to solve a specific problem and having a concerted focus on that. So can we fix all of the issues that lead to this underattainment, which we know are significant, because we're talking about lack of education, lack of access to basics, lack of housing, not having a social care system, not having standardized health care. There are a number of issues that, if you look at them as a whole, are completely overwhelming. And so what we've chosen to do is look at specific problems and try and address those issues head on. So to answer your question in a long-winded way, what we believe in doing is very specific, tangible things that change outcomes for people, improve their lifestyles, improve their income opportunities, improve their business potential, so they then become the ring bearers for their families.
Okay, you've spoken a lot about what you're doing, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it and understand that the people that will have access to all of these will be in the urban areas, will be in the cities. The women in the rural areas who do not have access to Android phone, at least, to have access to connect to the internet, I wonder how they will, tap into all of that. But would you recommend anything, that any strategy that government or people in elected offices would do as a program that would meet the woman within that 7/10 in the poverty family,
Right.
to meet them, because I think that, or well, I've heard people say that when you get a woman out of poverty, you get an entire family out of poverty. I don't know why it's just about the women there.
The women and the men, to be fair, we do need each other.
Okay, good. So what would you recommend for political leaders so that it will be a policy
Yes.
of getting to those women within that poverty line?
If I was given a magic board and said, what would you do if you could? I would say, let's go back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And there's several of them, but there's some specifically around women: education, water access, healthcare access, the very, very basics. So which organization in the government is dedicated to improving these outcomes? How much money are we putting in as a portion of taxes? What are the KPIs that we're working against? What are we benchmarking against? Do we actually know how many of these women and families that we're talking about? So if you don't know where you are, you cannot say what good is. What should our targets be 6 months from now, 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, in terms of the number of women and men that are educated, in terms of safety, housing, medical care? You see, these are all building blocks of what we're aspiring to, which is effectively a population that feels safe, is productive, and can take care of itself. But if we don't look at these building blocks, so my recommendation would be that we have a very, very clear set of KPIs and targets in each of these areas that I've mentioned: housing, education, safety, medical care, and a few other ones, and say, all right, year on year, we want to see improvements by 5%, by 10%. We go out, we baseline, we run the outreach programs, we dedicate the money to it. We ensure that the money gets to where it needs to go to, that it doesn't stop somewhere along the road. And we keep measuring and we keep challenging and we keep measuring and keep challenging, because change takes time, but it also takes focus. It takes money. It takes discipline. It takes good governance. These are all things we are very capable of doing.
Okay, your thought, you didn't look at the issue from the very common perspective, or improve agriculture, make trade easier and all of that, which suggests to me that you're looking at the capacity of the individual first of all, making sure that the person is capable of handling complex situation and the improvement that may come the person's way if the opportunity comes. But while all through all through the period you were speaking, you've been very careful, I guess, in emphasizing that it is not just about women but everyone.
Yes.
And that makes me to ask you a direct question. There's so much talk about women equality with men. Just tell me what you think in 30 seconds, 1 minute.
I think women's equality is human equality. And you said I keep bringing it back to us, and that's because I don't see us as separate. I do see us as interconnected. So yes, I am a woman. Women have very specific issues that need to be addressed, and I'm happy to delve into those in detail. But we are part of a society, and for any of these outcomes to change, we have to work together. We have to see it as each other's problems. So women's equality is our equality. If my life is good, your life is good. If my life is good, my family's life is good, and yours is good too. So I don't see them as opposed. I don't see them as in conflict. I simply think that some of us have been able to get away with oppressing some of us for a lot longer than we should have.
So you believe that, or you're saying that you do not think that men or the society deliberately suppress women?
No, I'm not saying that. I believe that that happens every single day.
Oh, really?
Whether it happens intentionally or unintentionally, it happens. But what I am saying is that in order to change that narrative and to make a different reality, we all have to say, okay, this is something that we have to do. Women in isolation can't do it. Even if we wanted to, we cannot. And it's not because we're 50% of the population, but it's because we live in a universe that includes men as well.
So to succeed means that men will have to agree with you, first of all, that they have suppressed women for too long.
I mean, that's one way of putting it. I don't know any man that I would talk to that would say, I suppress women, even if I thought that they did. People just don't see themselves in that way, and that's not a very helpful way of putting it either. I think what is more helpful is pointing out very specific scenarios that disempower women and addressing them and saying these are the types of outcomes you're going to get. So for instance, if you don't let women go to school, Yes, they're going to be 7 out of the 10 in poverty that can't read, that can't write, that can't start their businesses, that even if you gave them a phone, wouldn't know how to do it. So I think it's drawing a correlation between the actions that disempower and the outcomes. Not so much on the people specifically. Whenever you attack people, you tend to get the worst out of them. At the end of the day, it's about allyship. So yes, we may have done this in the past, we may be doing it today. But more importantly, what can we do today, tomorrow, next tomorrow, so that we can start to improve these outcomes together, not in a way that alienates anybody.
Okay, what can we do to change the narrative was the question you asked. And I would like you to answer that, just in a very short, as short as you can. What can we do to change that narrative?
I think first and foremost, we as women need to see and own ourselves as capable. We can, we have, we do, we always have. When we are no longer supplicants, we're no longer asking people for permission to be who we are. Whatever it is that you want in this life, claim it, take it, fight for it. Be willing to make the sacrifices, because you will make sacrifices. Nobody will give you anything. Nobody's going to make accommodations to make your life easier. Privilege is not given easily. Nobody gives up privilege willingly. So there will be a fight. But understand that we're part of a collective. And your desires are part of everybody else's desires. So just be ready to live by the choices that you make. Stand in your truth and do what you need to do. You will pay a price for it, but it will be worth it.
That's a very fine way and fine place to let it be. It's been a wonderful time having this chat with you, and we congratulate every woman, particularly those in the front line as we battle the pandemic all over the world. A lot of women have paid the price, and keep paying, and we recognize their contribution to keeping life together. Thank you so much for giving us your time on this interview. And to you that watched, we appreciate that you did. Thank you so much.